microphones and knock off your cameras, please.
Person nearly hang up then.
Thank you. Started.
Okay, thank you everybody, and thank you for attending this overview and scrutiny management committee for Friday the 30th of October. I won't read out the whole paragraph that we've done previously, but just to say that this is being recorded live, and for members to mute their microphones and switch off their cameras until they need to speak, and use the raise hand facility for any questions. We've received no apologies for the meeting, and as far as I'm concerned, we don't have any declarations of interest, but I'll give it a minute for anybody to put their hand up if there are any. Okay, everybody's had a chance to go through the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 24th of September. Again, I won't go through this page by page with it being a live meeting, but if anybody has anything that they would like to bring up on that, or anything that, you know, from my point of accuracy, then please do so now. But otherwise, I'm happy to move them as a true copy of the meeting. Okay, thank you. So our first agenda item is the Strategic Equalities Plan Annual Report for 1920. And I'd like to invite Councillor Mayor to come forward and give us an overview of the report, or pass it off to Rhys how he sees fit. So, Councillor Mayor.
Okay, I'll let Rhys kick off on that. He's the expert.
Thank you, Rhys. Would you like to present your report?
Thanks very much for that, Councillor Mayor. Good morning, committee. Hope everybody's doing well. I'm just going to give a very brief overview. We've got a number of people on the call this morning, so if there are any specific questions following my brief intro and then some words from Councillor Mayor, then we'll do our best to answer those questions this morning. So, as part of the Equalities Act 2010, we're required to annually report on our progress against our Strategic Equalities Plan, and to publish a series of workforce equalities data. So what you've got is the fourth and final annual report into the 2016-2020 Strategic Equalities Plan, and then the data that goes along with that. The new plan, the new Strategic Equalities Plan, was approved earlier this year and is now published on our website. The plan we're looking at the moment, though, gives us a really good basis for improvement against the areas that we've identified within that plan. What it shows, I think, is a pretty strong story around work with other organisations, work between departments within the council, and with our staff groups and with our communities, in order to deliver against the 9 equality objectives that were set within that 1620 plan. I just want to briefly mention some of the highlights within that plan. So, as you previously known, we've been running an apprenticeship scheme within the council. Rachel's on the call this morning, so if there are any specific questions about that, we can answer that. And in 2019, we were finalists in the ACT Training Employer of the Year Awards, which was pretty good considering the base that we started from. We've established an EU citizens meeting. We work in partnership with third sector organisations as well as local EU communities to develop our work around that area, and that's obviously particularly relevant at the moment. With our exit from the European Union. We successfully implemented our Black and Asian minority ethnic network within the council, and that's had a really positive impact, I think, on actually the work that we do with our staff around some of the issues those people face. Work-based Learning Academy has created job clubs, training courses and bespoke 13-week training programs to support young people seeking employment. Within the report, you will see the really good work we've done over the last number of years now around the reduction of young people non-education, employment and training, going from at one point the highest rate of young people being NEET in Wales to actually one of the best performing local authority areas as it currently stands. We've been participating in Oxford University's Inclusive Cities programme, which is about exchanging knowledge around migrant communities, and support for those communities. The Lighthouse 55+ scheme for older people celebrated its first anniversary. It supported over 250 people in the year into a floating support scheme, and those people have been prioritised for crisis and emergency referrals, so to make sure that they're dealt with efficiently and quickly. We've settled a further 9 families into the Newport area as part of the Vulnerable Persons Resettlement Scheme. And during 1920, the preparatory work for the new supported housing scheme for 6 young homeless people was undertaken. So, and that's now in place. We've undertaken our statutory consultation on schools' accessibility strategy, which is to improve and upgrade physical access to schools across Newport, which is obviously a critical component of our equalities plan. We've continued to develop our work to promote the Welsh language within minority communities across Newport, and now we've got a dedicated policy officer in place to ensure that we continue with that and we meet our statutory responsibilities from the Welsh Language Act. And we've continued our commitment to developing elected member champions with leads now for race, LGBTQ+, disability and impairment, Welsh language, and raising that equalities agenda across the council. So there's some good things, that happened. However, I don't think any of us would not recognise the size of the task still ahead of us. The workforce data presented within the report clearly shows a lack of representation within our workforce that we need to continue to work on, and that is heavily a part of the new equalities plan. And obviously the things that have happened so far this year have really put into sharp focus the continued inequity across the area with COVID-19, and then the work that was done around Black Lives Matters as well has really put into stark focus the differences in the communities that we need to continue to work through. So that was pretty much all from me. I'm going to hand over to the Cabinet member now for any comments, and then happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Councillor Mayor.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Rhys. I'm not going to say much about this because I've been a champion of the scrutiny process for over 20 years. I was a scrutiny chair. What I don't really want is for officers to be telling me stuff. It's for members to dig through the report and ask questions of us, really. I mean, this is the what this does for me is it really gives the fine detail to what our manifesto was for becoming the administration here in Newport. And you know, we've got a long way to go, but we've made huge progress, I think. And the way that this is embedded throughout the authority is essential. You know, we've since this started, we've had the socio-economic issue duty to add. We've got to try and embed that now as well. So, but this is what we're about. So, you know, I welcome any questions from members, and I will try to answer them. But probably Rhys and others will do better than I can. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mayor. I'll open the floor to questions, and Councillor Fordy, I believe you've got a question or a comment here.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you mentioned in the report, we've got a lack of black and ethnic minority people in our workforce, and I hear anecdotally from friends that if they've got an ethnic name, then they're less likely to get an interview. And what people have done is to anglicise their names, and then they've succeeded far more in getting interviews and then getting a job. well, this doesn't seem right to me, and I wonder what measures we can take to overcome this. And one measure that I suggest is that we actually remove names from application forms. Perhaps we could just use their initials whilst people were perusing interview forms. And is this one way that we can make some progress on this problem, or are there some other ways that you can suggest we make problems on this?
Thanks, Reece. Would you like to come back on that?
Yeah, I'll just say a very brief thing, and then I think I'll probably bring Rachel in for that. So we're not aware of any specific issues, Councillor Forsey, within our recruitment process. However, what we have done is move to an anonymous selection process as far as that's concerned. So, you know, shortlisting is done without any of that detail now, to ensure that there isn't any unconscious bias within that part of the process. Rachel, do you want to say anything else on that?
Yeah, just to add that the information that managers receive now when they're going through their shortlisting, it's all electronic, and they have candidate 1, candidate 2, candidate 3. They don't have any names at all anymore, which is a positive step forward for us to remove that unconscious bias. And we'll need to have some conversations later on around whether our evidence base suggests that we need to consider further steps in terms of positive action, and that'll be the next thing for us to look at. But recruitment is now done.
Thank you. Councillor Forsey, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, so you already do that. That's really good, because you know, I think it's quite discouraging when you hear about people being disregarded just for their name. Just following up on that, when you collect data about people who are applying for jobs, how else do you use that?
We obviously have to report on the information around applicant details, but we haven't done anything proactive as part of the equality plan in terms of applications. And I mentioned earlier around we might need to consider potentially positive action if the evidence is there to suggest that's required and what our options could be, but that would be something that we would need to look at in the future.
Thank you. And Councillor Matthew Evans. Councillor Evans, I think you're on mute.
I should know better by now. Thanks very much. It's very difficult when you're going back and looking back over such a period of time, and I appreciate the reasons why. But looking forward, I do have some concerns about the way we report these things. If you want to look at, for instance, when we're talking about the equality objective about tackling poverty, which is on page 27 of our report, we talk about we'll reduce poverty, and then we go through the actions of how we're expecting to do that, ensuring children have the best start in life, down to targeting work in our most deprived communities. We're very good at getting examples of what we're doing as a result of this, but unfortunately, again, we don't make comparisons with other local authorities. We don't look at best practice. So it's all very well saying, you know, we've got effective relationships with our partners, Newport Citizens Advice, adult community centres and things like that. But what are we doing? I mean, we all know that we've been struggling in the most deprived cities, wards in Wales. So we've got examples of what we've been doing in the community, but what we're not doing is saying, how has that made a difference? Okay, we're saying we've had events like jobs fairs. Well, we've had jobs fairs for 20 years, Adult Learners Week, things like that. But what are we actually doing? How can we as councillors look at what actions we're taking to reduce child poverty? Because we can have events, but what's the outcome of the events? You know, what actions can we take? How can we scrutinise to make sure we're doing well? Because ultimately, it's not a political point. Nobody wants to see child poverty or poverty full stop. But I'm not getting from this report moving forward how we're looking at local authorities best practice to ensure that we're actually making progress. What it appears we've actually gone backwards as far as an increase in the number of deprived communities in Wales.
Rhys, would you like to take that one?
Yeah, no, that's fine. I'll try not to spend the next 45 minutes in a response to that, Councillor Evans, because it's a very complicated piece of work. So take it on board. Your I suppose the main point is in reporting going forward. Obviously, we can pull together some more detail, because obviously it's difficult within the context of the strategic equality plan to pull some of those things together, but absolutely take on board your point, and perhaps that is to be subject to some additional reporting around the actual poverty agenda and actually where Newport actually sits. The Welsh Index of Multiple Deprivation obviously covers a whole range of different factors that make that up. So, you know, and things like access to services and equality, etc., and access to green space are all of the things that make up that index. They're not. It's not. It's not based on absolute poverty, but absolutely take your point on that. We can obviously for this report, it's probably as you've said, it's probably a little bit late for that, and obviously COVID-19 hasn't helped us with our timing of some of these things at the moment, Councillor Evans, as you're aware. But we can, if the committee would like, we can pull together some of that data to do some of those comparisons and report that back. Because actually, I think it is really useful to do that. The difficulties come with issues around tackling poverty. There are specific things the local authority can do, and there are specific things the partners can do. However, there are much bigger factors at play that actually influence it as well. So trying to correlate any of our activities against a change in deprivation is pretty difficult. However, but totally take your point. So we can do a bit of work on best practice, things that the local authorities are doing, some of the statistics that are involved in that, and the movements in some of those things over time, because that probably gives a bit more of the narrative then behind this particular objective.
Yeah, thanks, Rhys. I appreciate that. And perhaps we could do it on a. There are very few comparisons we can make in Wales. Perhaps there are other local authorities across the UK. Yeah. With similar. Would be great.
Yeah, there's a sort of you know, a family that Newport is part of, which is primarily with local authority areas in England that are more comparable. So yeah, we can certainly start looking at doing that.
Chair, excuse me for interrupting. I don't seem to have a hand facility on mine. Could I come in on that point that Matthew's made and Rhys has responded to, please?
Of course, carry on, Councillor Hurring.
We started to look at closing the gap between NHS provision and council provision, and Rhys and his colleague Joseph were doing quite a lot of work on that, and unfortunately that has rather slipped off the agenda. Could Rhys update you as to what we've actually started to do, please?
If you'd like to come in then, Rhys.
Can you just remind me exactly what that bit of work was, Councillor Howard? Sorry.
The first 1,000 days stuff, where we look at fetus through to the time that we as a local authority pick them up in school, and we find that there's deprivation has been built into these young people's life circuits by then, which proves, if not impossible, very, very difficult to pick up again from there. And Joseph was your lead guy on this. Can't remember his surname.
Yes, Joe. He's on secondment at the moment, so he's no longer with us. I don't know if Tracy McKim's on the call. She might want to pick some of this up. So we've been working quite closely with health colleagues and other partners around the ACEs agenda. So some of that is picked up in this report, and that's the adverse childhood experiences bit of it, which a lot of that first 1,000 days is around. So these are a range of factors that have a detrimental impact on people's lives as they go forward. Tracy, have you got anything further to add to that?
Yeah, Tracy, if you'd like to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of things. That's been rolled very much into the PSB and partner work. You're right about the 1,000-day project, and I Councillor Heron's described that very well, actually. I wouldn't add anything to that. We've got that work. We've also got some other preventative work with schools and looking at the ACEs agenda in partnership. We're just looking at the launch of a report on about triggers to exploitation, which is a related sort of piece of work, again, about poverty and how if that affects young people and brings them into a very traumatic experiences in life. That's something that's being launched right now. So lots of strands to that work, but it is very much on the partnership end, the PSB end, rather than the NCC end, because there's so much of that is about either health or the justice system and other colleagues. So we can also perhaps roll in some stuff from the PSB annual report when we update. The other thing to say, I'm conscious Councillor Howren's been the poverty champion for some years. We also now, of course, we should say publicly, have a cabinet member who's got poverty in her portfolio. And the delay of the socioeconomic duty has not really allowed us to get any traction on that work. I was going to say unfortunately, but it does give us more time. So once we get the new guidance, we're waiting for the socioeconomic duty guidance to come in. Once we get the new guidance, we also need to roll all of that into our decision making so that poverty and socioeconomic factors are considered in every decision in the way that other characteristics are. And that will be happening as part of our new plan and our new piece of work. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Tracy. And we've got a question then from Councillor Chris Evans.
Hi, thanks, guys. First of all, I'd just like to compliment and pick up on some of the points that other people have made as regards the positive action as regards to the BAME community, and seek some reassurances that we're working equally as enthusiastically with members of our LGBTQ plus community, which is important and sometimes potentially overlooked, but also so that we're ahead of the curve, members of our Eastern European community that may choose or have chosen to remain in the UK post-Brexit. Yeah, it's people that settle from Eastern European countries are often overlooked in reporting and appear to integrate incredibly well into our society and contribute greatly to our society. So perhaps it would be good in the future to have some figures as regards how we integrate people from Eastern Europe into our employment strategy, together with being members of the community and LGBT plus members. Thank you.
Thank you, Reece. Would you like to come back on that? Go on, Reece, it's okay.
I'll start. I'll bring in Tracy because Tracy's got the detail to that. No, that's really useful. So that we our focus is on inclusivity and representation. So, you know, there are specific things in here for each of those communities, which Tracy can talk through, I think, a little bit now. Obviously, the Eastern European one has also been picked up within our work around the EU exit. So, you know, we've had a specific work stream there about working with our own workforce within our providers, and also the broader population across Newport around all the settled status issues and encouragement around that. So we've had some very specific actions around that. I can't remember the exact figures now, Councillor Evans, but the update on the Brexit Task and Finish Group is going to Cabinet next week. So the Cabinet papers, I think, are live. I was going on the 11th, so the Cabinet papers will be live early part of next week. So the figures are in that about the work we've done around those communities.
Good, thank you, Reece.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know if
Tracy's good that we're current, you know, and you know, the focus has to be inclusive and a reflection of society, and we're not picking up on things merely because they're prevalent in the news at a particular point. You know, we need to be forward looking. And
yeah, no, you're absolutely right, Councillor Evans. Before Tracy comes in, just to say that, you know, I think the point I would say is, you know, as an authority, as one of the biggest employers in the area, it's really important for our workforce to reflect the communities in which we serve, wherever those communities are. So, you know, it isn't about one particular agenda. It's about just reflecting the populations that we serve. People will access services more efficiently, effectively, and better. They'll be more prepared to access services and contribute if actually the services that are being provided are familiar to them. So
you're totally right, and it leads to economic and social cohesion, doesn't it, as opposed to exclusion in the year and now, medium and long term. But thank you ever so much for the answer.
Tracy, did you want to come in on anything there?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So I won't add on the Eastern European discussion, other than to say we have a horrible habit, don't we, of reporting things according to some old objectives when we have other reports that are reporting this better because we're reporting on something we set ourselves 4 years ago. I think that's part of the problem here. The other reports do better service to that current work. I'll just say on LGBT specifically, thank you for raising that. Again, not really a heavy enough influence in our old plan, much heavier influence in our new plan. But to confirm that we are in the process of building a staff network in that respect. So that's some work that's developing this year. Some challenges there, as you might imagine, but we also have some of the engaging work led by Newport Youth Council that some colleagues in the room will be aware of, and we have a number of community groups partnering with external support groups. We've got some participatory budgeting work, which is about looking at using funding to support people affected by COVID, and again we've engaged with the LGBT community there. We're doing some Proud Councils work, and it would also be remiss of me not to say that the chair is the champion now for LGBTQ, and we didn't have a champion before for that group of people in society. So again, I think that shows progress. Thanks for bringing that up. That's useful to have that opportunity.
No, thank you, Tracy, and it's reassuring. But again, it is about, as you say, the reports and being ahead of the curve on something that is quite well. And it does. But no, we discussed this earlier as to whether I might have to declare an interest in my daughters involved. But it does seem to be like one of these things that the Youth Council is ahead of us on, ironically, and you know, it's strangely. Because I understand the Youth Council has a dedicated LGBTQ plus advisor, which as well, you know, the chair does great work championing and then will continue LGBTQ plus issues. But, you know, to have somebody with real insight at our disposal perhaps could be something that we might want to duplicate from our younger colleagues. To help inform our story as we move forward.
Yes, thank you. And the Youth Council and young people generally often seem to be ahead of us, don't they?
Thanks, Tracy. Councillor Anwami, I can see that you've been indicating that you want to come in there or have a question.
Yeah, I'm struggling. Is it just me? Do you see a raised hand on yours?
No, you just need to add your name into the chat box at the moment. The raise hand function isn't working.
Okay, thank you. I've got 3 questions, guys. Shall I take them? Do you want them all now, or do you want them one by one?
It's up to you. You can.
Okay. Fire away, Councillor.
Okay. Well, let me take that, because I'm sorry about that, but the pages are sort of playing me, because I looked at it on a different computer and I've got different pages. So, but I made notes of them. But on a page, I think 22 of the report, it talks about a cross authority. I think it's East Gwent or Gwent Authority on Travellers. I just want to know if you could give us. Can you elaborate on that? Because I want to know what that cross sort of authority cooperation does. How, is it active? The background to this is, if we are, why do we keep on having these unauthorized settlements? Because the report that I read makes it, that actually, we sort of liaise, we cooperate, we look at the new site, we look at the sort of existing site. So that is the background. Let me take them one by one. So can I ask you on that one?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll again, sorry, Tracy, I'll bring Tracy in for this because she knows the details about that group, I think. All I would say to start off with, though, before that, is to say that the current situation we're in due to COVID has obviously led to a series of incidents that we may not necessarily have had, and also may have been dealt with by government. So, I think there's some particular issues because of COVID-19 and restrictions, etc., that have led to some of the issues we've had this year. On that specific group, Tracy, do you want to just say anything about it?
Go ahead, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I make a more general point because East Gwent, if you like, is mentioned quite a few times in the report, and what that is our funding for community cohesion work is for us and Monmouth. So we actually lead for Newport and Monmouth. Our community cohesion officers work for Newport and Monmouth. So there's a whole range of cohesion, of which this is one, issues that work across that border that works very well for us. We do a lot of work with engaging with those communities. We also advise other bodies and talk to the police and colleagues within the council about the rights of the GRT communities. As Rhys said, there is a specific challenge around COVID, and I'm not sure the kind of encampment and challenge is something we can pick up as part of the equalities agenda specifically. That's probably a bit broader, isn't it?
Councillor Naomi, you're on mute, I think.
If I could just come in on that. Yeah, I can appreciate COVID, obviously, but can make a difference. But at the last council meeting, I think a lot of members in their questioning to the police mentioned the issues of unauthorized settlements. I had one in my own ward, which is actually by the Newport Centre. It was there a few days. Okay, the police succeeded in persuading the group to leave and so on. I think the issue is, I fully respect the right of travellers, obviously, like any other community in Newport. But if we could, through this liaison work we are doing, at least sort of, try and get the travellers community to appreciate, for example, that if they had to do what they have to do in terms of an authorised settlement because of the lack of a temporary traveller site, then perhaps when they leave, they can take all their rubbish, they can clear the site. In other words, they leave the site as they find it. I think that will go a long way in terms of the other communities where affected by that, to really sort of achieve a more harmonious relationship. And I think that should be part of the work of this East Gwent cross cooperation. So I don't know whether you wish to come back on that.
Rhys, if you wanted to.
Yeah, I'll respond to that. So at the heart of that, the work that we do is around trying to ensure that communities work with each other. So that's it. Then that's any community. So the Gypsy Roma Traveller community would be no different to that. I just manage expectations. I can't remember the exact level of funding now for communication because I'm a little bit further away removed from that specific budget. Tracy might be able to say exactly. It covers Newport and Gwent. It didn't fund one FTE, right? So I think that's still probably the case, Tracy. So the resource we've got for doing some of this is pretty limited as part of that Welsh Government programme.
Yes, can I just come in, Chair?
Yeah, of course, sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, to say, I try not to mention resources. It sounds like we're making excuses, but that is the truth of it. It funds a person across Newport and Monmouth during extremely challenging times. And I would also add to that as of next year, we have no guarantee of funding. In fact, Wales Government have said you may need to plan not to have any funding from April. And then we literally have no funding for community cohesion work. So it is a challenge, but what we try and do by working with partners and by working with another area of Gwent is spread the resource that we have as far as we can and take collective learning and so on. And of course the police plan in the same way, so we work to the same footprint that they do. It is a challenge, and the point you make is right.
Yeah. If I can leave that with you anyway, I think that's something we need to really look at, you know, in the years to come. If I could come to the other one, which is to do with the homelessness and the, you know, we've got a very active group there, isn't it, with the sort of the Woolwich and the Eden Gate and all that. And, you know, I mean, I've been right at the front, sort of forefront of it because of the issues in the city centre and all that. And I think, you know, together, we've got a good result in the sense that during this crisis, you know, the council has really succeeded in trying to take people off the street, which is a very good thing. And you know, I personally would congratulate them on doing that. There's just one issue though, because we're talking about equalities here. Some of the rough sleepers, so it's been relayed to me, for example, one reason they may not like to be sort of attended to either by Eden Gate or the Woolwich or something, is that, you know, I think they mentioned that they have to have a service or religion or something like that. You know, I mean, I'm fully open to all faiths and to no faith. I think that's what equality should be. But it would be perhaps useful to relay those concerns that you know, organizations that do help us with homelessness, and we appreciate that very much, and they collaborate and they do excellent work. And as a ward councillor, I couldn't be more, you know, praiseworthy for them. Is, you know, perhaps we need to follow a less religious route here, because people these days, as we know, you know, they belong to all faiths. I mean, various faiths, and they belong to no faith. And I think it's reasonable to treat this as a civil issue rather than sort of a religious issue, you know. So,
Reece, if you'd like to come in.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Chair. I haven't heard that, but if that's a concern, we can certainly pass that back to the relevant services. Okay.
Any further questions, Councillor Al-Nawami?
Third one there, and then a piece after that. In tackling poverty, and of course it's a very topical issue right now, isn't it? So, sort of high-profile people and right at the sort of government and parliament and all that. But there's a mention, action for the communities first. Now, personally, I've had a great experience with communities first when it actually was operated on ward level, and picking up some of the sort of social media things, you know, to do with the Rashford thing and all that. And people from the community are coming and saying, you know, we really, one way of trying to beat poverty and children poverty is to actually sort of pass on, you know, sort of pass on experience to how they can actually prepare food. They can do it cheaply for families with children so they don't go hungry and all that. All very good stuff. And actually that used to happen. That did happen with the stage 1 of Communities First we had in Stohill. I can remember being honoured to be asked to judge sort of a kind of mini chef competition, and some of them even presented at the Newport Festival. Well, of course, all that disappeared now, and the youth group has disappeared, and funding, as you mentioned with the last question, is obviously an issue. But there is a mention of Communities First. So I'm asking really, is that still sort of alive in other wards or in other clusters or whatever? Does it do anything, you know, sort of hand on with the community?
Reece, would you like to come in?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely fine. So, you know, again, you know, one of the difficulties with this, we're reporting back on the last year of a 5-year plan. So when this was written, Communities First was alive and kicking in those communities, and subsequently, obviously, those programs have now changed. So within regeneration, investment and housing, what they've tried to do is bring together the currently existing programs, which are designed to tackle poverty, into a more cohesive set of programs through the community hub model. So, and obviously that's still progressing. So I think the short answer to your question, obviously that program doesn't exist anymore in the way that it used to. And I remember the same as you. I think I've been to one of those, you know, back in the day, been to one of those MasterChef events, and there was some really good work done about teaching people life skills, etc., and the sorts of things they need to know in order to make the most of any income they had, and actually provide them with the skills in order to maybe access employment or higher paid employment. But those programs don't exist in the same way. So what we're looking at now is a different set of programs around work and skills, and the development of those things. Again, it sits in regeneration, investment and housing. So if you want specific response back on those sorts of programs, we can certainly ask for that and get that reported back to the next committee meeting.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cabinet member should have something to say on that, because I think there are a lot of people in the communities, you know, who would wish to do voluntary work on this. But I think, you know, they need some support, and they obviously look at the council for support. And I think, you know, that we ought to really look at this, particularly now. The profile is high. I think child poverty is a real issue. And I don't think we should just leave it to the government. You know, I mean, what's his name? Marcus Rashford obviously showed it doesn't have to be left to the government, but we have to do something ourselves. We can support people to do these voluntary things, you know, to try and sort of learn how to prepare perhaps, you know, meals which are sort of more suited to their pockets and all that. I know from social media there are people who have said they want to do that.
Councillor Mayer, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah, I was a fan of the concept of Community First, but not necessarily the practice, which is why we have introduced the hub model. Unfortunately I mean, it's just the start of it. We opened the Ringland hub, which is the model for all the hubs across Newport to serve communities, to be on the doorstep of people and not have to travel, of all the service to be in one place. So that was the start of what we did. But unfortunately, just after we opened it, COVID kicked in, and what we were stuck with then is trying to deal with a different issue than the issues that mostly the MICDAD has called about, but they are embedded in it. I mean, that's the whole process of it, and the reorganization of our communities groups based around the hub is exactly the model, because it's proved itself just superbly active during the COVID. It served the communities where they need them right from day one. It kicked in. I was astonished, really, because normally we would, when we introduce something like this, we'd like to test it for a bit before we and tweak it. But it went straight in, hit the road running, and it's going to go from strength to strength. But once we get out of this crisis, we will then learn the lessons that that have arisen from there and make it even better.
Yeah, thank you, David. And just bear in mind, though, really, one hub in Ringland doesn't, you know, it's just for that locality. Obviously, there are many other wards, many other areas in Newport who previously benefited from Communities First, and they would like to be able, you know, to participate. And I'm really sort of talking about, not necessarily a formal program like Communities First, but perhaps supporting any voluntary work that might come and something that the council might take the initiative. So yeah, okay, let's look at it. That's really what I think we should be doing.
Yeah, Councillor Mayor, come back on that.
Yeah, I mentioned Ringland Hub because that was the model for all the other three hubs. Right? But we haven't done the other three hubs. We've put the management structure in, but we haven't got the actual hub system working. We're working towards that, and that's going to take some time. And it was intended to take some time. But I mentioned Ringland because it's the one that was set up perfectly for what we want in all the other areas. But that doesn't mean to say we're not working in all the other areas. The 4 teams are working really strongly. And when you say about the community groups, that's something that I've certainly, because it's in my title, communities, is that I want all communities to be linked in some way with those 4 hubs so that we can help every community. And I'm not just talking about communities that set up to help homeless or educate people. I'm talking about just every community.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you.
Councillor Chris Evans, you've got a point.
No, it's fine, Chair. It's not relevant. So they were answered adequately by the cabinet member. So let's move on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Berry, do you have a question? Because I know you've indicated that you can't see the hands up function.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thank goodness me. No, I did have a question about 5 years ago. Unfortunately, there's something wrong with my system, and I think a few other people are having a problem. I just wanted to apologise that we're not engaging here because it can't come in when we need to. My hands up feature is just totally gone. So I'm not too sure how I can go forward, to be honest.
You just need to put your name in the comment box and then we'll bring a question forward.
Is that what we'll do? Just put our name? Okay, thank you.
So no question for the moment?
No, it's long gone.
Okay, Councillor Ferris, the same for you?
Same for me, actually. You just don't seem to be able to find the hands feature at all.
Same again, just put your name in the box and we'll be okay. So no question for on the plan?
No, I'm okay, thanks. It's all dealt with.
Okay, and I'll just give it a second to see if anybody else indicates any questions, and if not, just to thank you for attending today and go on to the second agenda item. So,
Chair, sorry, can I just draw?
Yeah, of course.
No, it's only about this speak function. Anne is very kindly emailing me, and mine is no showing. And what this means, I have no idea. We're having trouble showing your WIKI right now. Please try again later. So that's where the meeting notes are supposed to go.
Okay, so going forward, if you'd like to put your name in the chat box if you have a question. So thank you, Rhys, Tracy, Councillor Mayor, for attending today. I mean, you're happy to drop off the call and then we can take the second agenda item on safeguarding.
Many thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Take
guys.
Care. Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, group.
Thank you. Okay, so agenda item number 2 is this is the annual corporate safeguarding, again back to 1920, and I'd like to invite Sally and Mary to come and present that.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
I think Mary's going to start off and then we're both going to be available, and actually Chris is on the call on behalf of Adult Services as well if there are any questions. So between the 3 of us, hopefully we'll be able to do the report justice and answer any questions you may have. So I'll hand over to Mary to start with. Okay.
Thanks, Sally. If you'd like to go ahead, Mary.
Hi, good morning, everybody. First of all, just before we start, I just want to thank Councillor Forsey in terms of asking for the abbreviations template. So that'll done. I'll make sure that's included in every report going forward. Obviously, what's hard about this report is this is work that was done last year, and it should have been reported to you sort of almost 7 months ago now. So I apologise for that. Lots of the actions we've carried on working on, but I'll try and
go back as if it was for last year and give you the update as we go through. So progress on all the areas that were identified last year have been achieved on, and they will be reported in the 2021 report. But obviously we haven't been through scrutiny for that process. We recognise in terms of scrutiny wanting the report again to be briefer, but when we had the Welsh Audit Office in, they were very, very concerned that we didn't, and that we made sure that we're very, very concrete about what we report to scrutiny or not. So this report is really sort of a hybrid of what scrutiny requested and what the Welsh Audit Office said that we needed to make sure went to scrutiny. So it was a combination. Going forward, though, we hope that we've started working last year on a corporate safeguarding audit toolkit. So that'll be for all areas of the council to work on that, and then we will be able to present that to scrutiny, and hopefully that will make it much clearer in terms of how we are doing across the whole council in terms of safeguarding. So that might make it clearer for scrutiny. And that will emphasise each service area, so you'll be able to see whether there's areas that we need to improve on or areas that we need to give further training or support to. So throughout 1920, Newport officers continue to be very active members of the regional Gwent Safeguarding Board, which is the two safeguarding boards, the Children's Safeguarding Board and the Adult Safeguarding Board, which have a sort of a hybrid Gwent Safeguarding Board panel. And also we've continued to host the Violence Against Women and Domestic Abuse, Sexual Violence Partnership Board, which sits with Newport but actually is for the whole region. So they have continued. And also through 1920 we carried on having our local safeguarding practitioner events. That's for anybody in Newport. We have had some councillors in the past who have turned up for that, and that's really a chance to update in terms of what's going on from a board perspective, but also what's going on in your local area, how we can make sure that services are clear about what they need to be doing, where they need to refer to, where they can get an advice and support from. So the report also talked 1920 in brief regarding the audits that happened from a safeguarding perspective in Newport. So there was the internal report in terms of adult at risk, which had a good rating, and there was some of the main weaknesses really to do with the delay in strategy discussions with the police when we've had some concerns. That those have been resolved now, but that's the work of this year. At that point, there was more work that needed to be done. We had a number of external report inspections. One was the Welsh Audit Office Council, and that in terms of the outcomes of that, it was saying that we had implemented all the corporate activities that we needed to do to improve our safeguarding, and that they felt that the council's corporate activity and its ethos is that safeguarding involves us all was sort of evidenced through the inspection process. The Care Inspector Wales had a couple of focus inspections for us for adult services in terms of they had a positive outcome, and also in terms of the advice and assistance in terms of both child and adult, and they felt that there was clear processes in place for citizens, and that the co-location of the police and the domestic abuse services within Civic had been very positive. We also had hosted the first joint inspection, the JITCA, the first joint inspection for all the inspectorate bodies in Wales. It's happened a couple of times in England so far, but Newport was the sort of pilot for that. Sally will be able to talk a lot more about that, but that came up with some very effective joint working tools, which was great. So in terms of the developments for 1920, what we did start, what we said we would do from the previous report, and what we have been able to complete is we launched the Safeguarding Champions in every area of the council. That's a very active role. We support those representatives. Their details are all available on the website, so anybody in any service area can see. Obviously, things have changed a little bit in the year in terms of things that we wanted to do with that group, but the network is still up and running, and it's still working in terms of making sure if there's any safeguarding referrals or issues within any of the council areas, they know who to go to, and they've got good support from ourselves as sort of central safeguarding. The e-learning mandatory safeguarding training was also something we wanted it to be up and running towards the end of last year. There were some delays with that in terms of getting it onto an e-learning platform that we would be able to accurately record who had attended across the organisation. So it's for everybody new who's coming into the council, and that includes volunteers, chaperones, members, and anybody as well as employees. But actually that's up and running now. So that was launched in August this year. It was supposed to be launched at the end of February, but August that started. And again, for 2021 we'll be reporting on how that's been picked up in terms of the training. We've also started working on, last year was the tiered training framework for all employees. So depending on where you are in the council, what do you need to know about safeguarding? What's the level of expectation we would have on those people? So we're still pulling that together now, and hopefully that should be complete now by the end of this year's report. We also launched last year the caring for somebody else's child, which was a requirement under the special guardianship regulations, so that's all done. That was all complete, and that was on the website. The Newport Safeguarding Hub website, practice. So that started as a pilot in Newport, and that was about looking at sort of a co-location of the police and other service areas to make sure that we've got more of an immediate response to safeguarding issues for adults or children. That was a pilot on behalf of Gwent, that we started a couple of years ago now. In 1920, that has become that's become the practice. It's no longer a pilot. That is the practice, what's happening. So we both have adults and children based on the same floor with police. There was domestic violence, and we have lots of early intervention and prevention partners also based in there, as well as housing, and some from third sector provided drug partnerships. That's going really well, and that's going from strength to strength. This year now, that's going to an east and west model, but that'll be for next year. But at that time, it was agreed that that would carry on, and that become sort of common practice. In terms of the Operation Encompass, which is a police and education programme in terms of any domestic abuse that had happened at night time, that the police would contact the school to let them know the next morning that something had happened. So if Johnny turned up without his homework or was a little bit late or whatever, there was some understanding about there may be other issues there, instead of sort of maybe being more punitive in terms of why things hadn't happened. At that time, between 19 and 20, that was being run from the police to the Safeguarding Children's Hub in the Civic Centre, and then we were sort of risk assessing it, and it was going straight out to the schools. So the schools will have that information by 8:30 in the morning. We've gone now, we can remove the hub bit in the middle, but that's not required at the moment, and we're having sort of direct referrals from police to the schools, and that's working very well. The schools are reporting that they feel a lot more supported, and that they can understand in terms of some of the things that are happening to the children. I think I've got some statistics in the report, just to give you some information, but pretty significant in terms of the amount of police activity in some of our houses at night time, and why would that not affect the children then at school? So we're carrying on working with that. So those are the main things in terms of all the developments that we did last year, 1920. I suppose really the actions for consideration for yourselves as a scrutiny committee, and this is going back, I know, several months, but the main one, and it's still live today really, is about sort of the DBS in education, the disclosure and barring system. So that's just a way of we can check that there's nothing happened. So if I was to come and work in Newport City Council today in a school, I'd have my DBS, which is the checks with the police and whatever, to see whether I've got any sort of history or anything that needs to be you need to be aware of as an employer. What we did is we did a bit of a scoping exercise last year, and it appears that within education that was sort of our weakest part as a council, and it appears that unless you have moved schools or you've moved jobs or posts, then there's no checking, so no sort of double checking in terms of that. So majority of the council, especially in social care, it's every 3 years because of the roles they have with vulnerable people and children, but in schools that wasn't the same. central education do it every 3 years for their colleagues, but actually in schools it's very different. So we do have some teachers and some education staff in schools that maybe had the old Criminal Record Bureau check, you know, sort of 10, 12 years ago, and have never had any other checks since then. Obviously, we've got systems in place for if there is anything happening or somebody was arrested, that the police would contact us. But this is just sort of that additional check and that additional clarification. It's probably the only thing we've got to use. So the consideration was really for the scrutiny to look at that. I've provided some of the scoping that we did with people in organisational development about looking at that. What does it look like? How many would it be? So it was really, we were looking to scrutiny in terms of whether they felt that was an appropriate use of our time and whether we should continue with that. So that was the first one. That's still outstanding through, you know, we've carried on working with schools, but actually and it'll have to go through sort of senior leadership in terms of there is a cost involved with that in terms of the check, but so that's for that one. The other issue in sort of February, March last year was really about there's going to be a new launch of a Wales safeguarding procedures under the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, and the majority of that of work for us was really about managing professional concerns, safeguarding allegations of staff or chaperones or volunteers or people that we work with. At that time, that was a bit of a pressure. I have to say that's all done and dusted now, so that's really not an issue for this scrutiny, because 7 months later we've worked on it and it's all in place now, and that can be reported on in 2021. The third pressure really for scrutiny to consider was really about the Mental Capacity Act, and there's some changes to that in terms of the deprivation of liberty safeguards was changing to something called an LPS, so there's a liberty protection safeguards, and I put a bit of an addendum and appendices, so if people wanted to read a little bit more about that. Now that was due to come into force in October 20. And there's quite a lot of pressure in terms of making sure we have staff trained and able to work with the legislation, and also obviously to make sure that people are safe. At that time, we had 310 people who were subject to a deprivation of liberty safeguard from Newport City Council. So Newport City Council, we're a supervisory body, and it's up to us then to sign as signatories in terms as an authorised body to see whether they are appropriate or not, and whether they're required. The whole liberty protection safeguards changes that quite a lot in terms of, especially for our workforce. So the 310 that we had at the time, actually we've already seen that number far exceeded as this year's gone on, and that's just with the deprivation liberty safeguards. With the new system, there will be more. So there's quite a lot of work that we need to do on that. That was a huge pressure for the council and for the region and for Wales, but actually that's just been put off now due to COVID, and that's not going to be coming into force until March 2022. So that gives us a little bit more chance to get our staff trained and ready, and also we need to do some communication with our communities about what those changes are and what they need to consider. So that would have been a significant impact in October 20, but obviously we've got a little bit of grace on that. We still need to do the work, but we do have a little bit of grace on that. The other thing really was that we were working on, but it was really for members' information, was really that we have worked on the self-assessment, the safeguarding self-assessment tool for each area. That will be reported on in 2021, as I said, and it will be fully compliant with the Welsh Audit Office and Welsh Government requirements in terms of what we need to be reporting on as a council to ensure that we've got our safeguarding policies and processes, and in terms of where people need to report to, so that people are supported in that. And it also feeds into the education document in terms of keeping learners safe. So we've tried to not make things too complicated, but try and make them as streamlined as possible. The other thing we've carried on working on, but it has been a little bit delayed, and that's about the central register in people in organisational development for our volunteers and chaperones. So we have one central thing, so that we can make sure all safeguarding checks are completed, and that also training compliance is all in place for our chaperones and volunteers. So that's it briefly. I'm not sure if there's any specific questions or anything you'd like me to speak to further, or whether Sally or Chris wanted to add anything.
And before I open the floor then to questions, Sally or Chris, did you want to come in with anything, or did you want to just answer from the questions that might come in?
No, I'm fine. For me, we'll just take questions as they come now. That'll be fine. Thank you. I think it's pretty comprehensive. Thanks.
Yeah, and same for me. Happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Before I ask, I'll open the floor to the members before I ask potentially a couple of questions I have written down, but I'm just waiting. Of course, as I said previously, if you need to ask a question, if you can put your name in the chat box, because the hands up isn't working.
Chair, I think some councillors are having issues with their Wi-Fi, just to let you know. Okay, thank you.
No problem. Okay, well, whilst I'm waiting then, I've just got two points. One of them, obviously, because this is a report looking back, it's quite, as you said, it's quite difficult to do. But there's a comment that a children's website will the start of that will be coming into May 20. So obviously it's not fair to ask a question, but obviously, like I said, it has. I just wanted to know, has that started, even though it's not anything to do with the content of the back report? I'm just wondering if that children's website has started for May 20.
I think, sorry, there's general work going on in that area, but it has been stalled, unfortunately.
Okay, thank you. And my second point then was, it was relating to the safeguarding and the schools, and where we've got approximately 90% of schools have a current safeguarding audit in place. So I'm just wondering what we've done or what we are doing to capture those other 10%, because obviously this is a really important area in the school. So the 10% that don't have them, what are we doing to ensure that we're at 100% on that one, really, because it's an amber area.
Okay, and it was an amber area then. I mean, I can report today that actually we've got 100% at Brilliant. The moment. So that's really yeah. Because there's been probably a little bit more time for some of the teachers to be able to address some of those issues. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that. That was mine. Okay, Councillor Matthew Evans, indicated for a question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just some general comments, really. One was about, it's a shame that the Audit Office have asked for more detailed reports, because I must confess I find these reports pretty heavy going from a lay perspective. So I'm not quite sure what their intention is about that, but I do welcome the fact that we've got explanations on the graphs. Again, we don't have any comparisons with other local authorities, and I think that would be helpful. One thing I will say is that we've been asked to consider whether the structure of Newport safeguarding unit structures and individual teams' key priority plans are appropriate to meet the council's responsibilities in safeguarding matters. Now, as far as I'm concerned, that's an operational matter. I haven't got a clue. I can ask you the question and whether you think there's adequate monitoring of performance management frameworks, but I think those are things which, again, I don't feel qualified enough to comment on. What I do feel qualified to comment on is when we're talking about the issue of members and the safeguarding training, which all council employees should have done. A couple of points. Firstly, I did manage eventually to do my online training, but I can assure you it was probably one of the hardest tasks I had to do. It was a ridiculous system which required numerous passwords, and so I guess, and I know I'm not the only one, because I had a number of other colleagues who contacted me who didn't do it. So it's not your responsibility about the system, but can I suggest as we move forward that system is simplified? Other organisations can do it with a quick link. I don't see why the council can't do something similar. And as far as the DBS checks goes, okay, yeah, you're talking about cost of what, £50 per person every 3 years. How much of a risk do you think it is if we don't go ahead and do it, or do you feel we should make a recommendation to yourselves that actually it's a small price to pay? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Matthew. I don't know who'd like to. Maybe would you like to come back on those?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of the DBS, I mean, unfortunately, if we look back on national tragedies, you think about the SOAM caretaker and whatever, and those tragedies that happened. And I'm not saying the DBS in place or the CRB would have made a difference in terms of the actions of that terrible tragedy, but actually it's sort of using what we've got. And if that's the only thing we've got, we would like to think that we've got very good working relationships with our local constabulary in terms of if there are any issues or any arrests that come up, and they're aware that somebody is an employee or a chaperone or works in any capacity for Newport City Council, that they would use the professional concerns and they would share that with us. But this is just a general, it's wider than that. If it's something that's happened outside of the locality or whatever, it is a very basic check, but actually, and it's only as good as the day that it's completed. But I think it's better. I think it's probably the only thing we've got to use.
Thank you. Councillor Al-Nawami, you've got a question?
Can I just come in?
Oh, yeah, sorry. I'm sorry.
Can I just come in relation to the training? I think probably that the training, that was the training in relation to the violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence, or was it the wider safeguarding training?
It was the wider safeguarding training.
Okay, because I'm very conscious that there have been real challenges about the Voucher SV training because that's nationally provided, but we'll pick up the matters in terms of the internal training and we'll take that forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And the only other thing was to come back about being qualified, about commenting about the structures, because I would have thought that they're operational matters.
Okay.
And I don't know whether you think you've got adequate monitoring and performance. I'm sure you have. Yeah. But perhaps all I can do is ask for reassurances that you're happy with those, I suppose.
I think we are happy. I think what's particularly good is the steps that we're taking going forward in terms of the increased provision that we'll have with increased police presence for us. And I think that's very welcome, not just across adults and children's and social services, but for the whole of the council, because that gives a resilience to our corporate safeguarding and understanding that we have that presence and that ability to work together. Obviously, working in tandem with the police in this area of the work, it's an absolute imperative. So I think that's a very welcome step forward, and that move from Gwent Police to recognise the importance of having a more localised approach rather than a centralised protection unit is really welcome. So I think we were doing okay before. I think we will probably do better going forward. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Al-Nawami, you have a question?
Yeah. I mean, to be honest with you, it's a minefield, really. This report, for us to give it justice, is so long, is so complex, is so sort of, what can I say, you know, can we really do justice to it? But I sort of turn to one issue here, which is very topical for us: deprivation of liberty. So at the moment, it's not just people. People we're responsible for, but we have all our liberty we've been deprived of all our liberties, haven't we?
Yeah.
You know, and yeah, I mean, you know, you sort of think about it, it's a legal minefield, really. Yeah. But coming back to the report, which is section 11, and I understand fully what you're trying to say there, but I turn to the sort of last paragraph. We sort of put a lot of responsibility on you guys, you know, on the council and the we employ, because it says the new legislation will have a significant impact upon health and social care staff. The Act will require staff to possess specific knowledge, competence and skills to implement the requirements of the Act in caring for and making determination about the citizens. And, you know, this is about depriving them of their sort of liberty standard. Their care for implementation is expected to commence in October 2020 which is today, with full implementation expected by 2021. And I think my question is, you know, how do you feel about that paragraph? Do we have the staff with the specific knowledge?
I think
have the staff with the competence to do it.
Yeah.
If we don't, are we going to obtain them?
Okay. Sorry, Chris. Do you
Yeah,
want to
come back on that.
say-
Maybe.
Thank you. So yeah, and I think that's what it really was a pressure. It would have been remiss to have put a safeguarding report in for last year without reference to it, because it is a big pressure. It's not just a pressure for Newport, it's a pressure for all councils. But yes, I mean, we didn't realise in February, March time that actually there would be a reprieve and that we would have another couple of years to actually get this into place. And I think if COVID hadn't happened, we probably would be. It would have been an awful pressured summer to make sure we have enough staff. We do have very experienced staff, and we have dedicated staff who are fully briefed and trained in terms of the Mental Capacity Act, which is where this all comes from. So they're able to carry out best interest assessments on individuals. But we are also part of a regional consortium in terms of this whole piece of work. So we do feed into a regional piece of work that's managed by health, but the change in the legislation would be different, and our responsibilities as a council would be slightly different. So yeah, that's what we needed to really get our head around, to make sure we've got enough staff trained in understanding what the changes would mean, but also to make sure that people who were already subject to deprivation of liberty safeguards are actually able to be transferred over to the new legislation. It would have been a pressure.
Yeah, so is the sort of timetable altered because of the COVID? So
yes.
221, when we say 221, so what's the new one now?
So it's March 2022 for implementation.
Okay, and the other thing is, this applies across all ages, presumably, yeah? Or
yeah.
Just sort of adults, or?
Yeah, well, so the mental capacity legislation is for over 18s. However, if we are considering a deprivation of liberty for somebody between 16 and 18, or as a child, so because there are occasions when we have used them, and from a council perspective, there's a couple of times we've used the deprivation of liberty safeguards for children that we're looking after who have had very high needs. Then that's a slightly different system in terms of the court. So we go to court for an inherent jurisdiction, and it's a judge that makes that decision. So we still, as social workers, would be making the recommendation, but we'd have to be very clear. So it's for everybody, but the majority is for over 18s.
Yeah. So I mean, specifically, are we going to have to recruit new people here, or people with that specific knowledge?
Well, I think we're hoping that we're going to have to train up the staff we've got. Yeah.
Train rather than new people.
Yes, I think so.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Chris, did you want to come in on that at all? I can see your camera's still on. Or...
No, I just agreeing with Mary, really, just to say that we already have these legal responsibilities, councillor. So this is just a change in an existing act, but it means that we have to train staff in specific skills so they can authorise people. And it's mainly people in care homes that this affects, and it's mainly people who can't make those decisions for themselves, so that don't have mental capacity. So it's already something we do, but this is kind of a new way of approaching it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's not just sort of care kind of experience, or isn't it? It's quite legal as well, isn't it? So,
yes, it's a legal framework. Yeah.
So would you have that capacity? You know, would we have that capacity before March 22?
Yes, I mean we already work in this way now, actually, with our legal colleagues in the council. So yes.
And can I just sort of say there, the social workers are used to working with legislation, and that that's part of their sort of basic training, really. And it's about, from a council perspective, is making sure that as there are changes, that we make sure that the training is available and appropriate to the level of what's needed. So whether it's the Social Services and Wellbeing Act, previously the Mental Capacity Act, the Children's Act, the Community Care Act, social workers are used to that way of working, and we are supported by our legal colleagues.
Thank you. Councillor Fawes, you've got a question.
Hello. Thank you, Chair. I wanted to make a couple of comments. One is that about the online training, which I did manage to complete without too much difficulty once somebody let me have the password. I think it's important to highlight some of the very positive things that are in this report. I think we're a bit trained to just dive in and look at the problems, but looking at the report on page 7, where the inspection highlights that children's services managers communicate effectively. There is a supportive, open, non-blame culture, and practitioners feel safe in sharing their decisions. I think it's important to highlight the really positive things that are in here as well. The question that I have, though, is about the domestic violence, which the graphs on page 11 show to be the highest levels of incidents, and about whether the COVID restrictions is going to lead to a highlight in domestic violence, and what is being done to prepare for that.
Okay, Mary, if you'd like to come back.
Yeah, so in terms of, as you know, we host not only the Valder SV regional team, but we actually host the IDVA, the Independent Domestic Violence Advocates. So if there is sort of a high risk of domestic abuse, so you'd go to a MARAC, and that's a multi-agency risk assessment conference. So all agencies would come together about coming up with a safety plan with, usually, it does happen with men, but usually with that woman, in terms of what we can put around them. Throughout the whole of this, obviously, I'm sort of talking about sort of post-COVID now, or in the middle of COVID, those contacts, those IDVAs have continued to work with those high-risk victims who have and are experiencing domestic abuse. So that service hasn't stopped throughout sort of COVID lockdown. We've had to come up with different ways to make sure we have contact. We've worked closely with the police in terms of any issues that are coming up for them that we need to be aware of. So that has continued. In terms of, we haven't seen locally a huge rise in terms of referrals to the IDVA service, but there has been some rises. But from a council perspective, we have done some more work. So in the summer, I mean, this isn't about last year's report, but in the summer now, we've done a sort of a temperature gauge with all staff in terms of Newport City Council, in terms of how they're feeling. You know, we know abusers like to work from home, so it's about what's that's been like for people. How have they felt? How have we been able to support our staff and colleagues while they've had to work from home? So there's been a whole raft of different information that's been out there for employees as well as for citizens in terms of how they can get support. So coming up, we've got National Safeguarding Week for a week, and then we've got 16 days of action, and that's from Welsh Government in terms of the violence against women, domestic abuse and sexual violence, and that is all about working specifically on the issues that have been raised through COVID.
Thank you. Sally, did you want to come in there? I think your microphone's on mute, maybe.
Thank you. And just first of all, thank you, Councillor Forsey, because that inspection was an ordeal and beyond. So I'm really grateful that you'd picked up the positive outcome from it. Just in relation to children and domestic abuse during COVID, obviously Mary's talked about some of what's happened in terms of adults, and from a children's perspective, we did see an increase in referrals where domestic abuse was an issue for families over the period that we've recently been through. What we were fortunate in being able to do was to extend some work that we were doing with the Home Office funded by the Home Office, which particularly looked at support for children who were in households where there were domestic abuse, and that's been carried out with our Family Support Partnership. It's been difficult work to continue, certainly in April and May, when obviously we were having to work in a perhaps more restricted way even than now, but nonetheless that did give extra support to children in families where domestic abuse was an issue, and given the increase in referrals that we had in that period, that was very welcome support that we had. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Chris Evans has indicated for a question, but I think he might have dropped off. I think we might have lost Councillor Evans. Councillor Hurricane, you've indicated that you wanted to speak.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As I said to you earlier, the meeting notes are just not working. I go back to the point that Mick Dad touched on, and there were 2 appendices issued to this report today. We only received them yesterday, I think. The Liberty Protection Safeguards and the Individual Safeguard terms. Now, as I understand it, under the existing Mental Capacity Acts, where deprivation of the liberty of the person is likely to happen, they have the right to an independent solicitor. And I'd like to know how these 2 appendices are to be incorporated into the working practices of the social services departments, and what the officer's stances are on independent solicitors being needed to possibly challenge the assessments that they've made.
Okay, shall I take that one?
Yes, please, thank you.
So Councillor Hurricane, for every time a deprivation of liberty assessment is done, and it's pretty lengthy in terms of the whole detail, so it's really to do with in terms of the very basics. There's some sort of templates in terms of what needs to be, why it needs to be applied, and that's really that the person is unable due to cognitive impairment to consent to the care and treatment and the accommodation where they're going to live. So that's the first thing, and then it's also about the nature and the sort of subjectivity of the restrictions that they're under. So whether they're able to leave the accommodation if they wanted to, whether there's any covert medication in place, and it all becomes very, very specific and very, very person-centered for the needs of that individual. As part of the assessment, there also has to be an independent advocate identified, and who has to agree to do that. If we have somebody who doesn't have anybody in their family who can do that, or can who can act independently, then the council, we make sure that we pay for that in terms of making sure they're represented, because we are aware. So for some family members, you may think it's the best place for mum or dad to be for their own health and safety. However, the minute mum or dad say, I don't want to be here, I want to be somewhere else, they have to appeal that decision. And some families find that hard. So that's absolutely no problem. It's done independently, and then those decisions are appealed and go through due process.
Can I come back on that?
Of course, please do.
I was thinking more of the emergency situations, and they normally seem to happen on bank holidays or periods when we don't normally man offices. What provision is in place for that sort of safeguarding? Somebody finds themselves out at St Lawrence and they don't want to be there.
Okay.
We've had interface with these people previously, so what will happen then?
Okay, I think it will really depend on the circumstances about and in terms of their mental capacity, in terms of their ability to consent or not to consent. There are urgent orders that can happen within 7 days, so they sort of highlighted their prioritise. I don't think we get very many of them, I have to say, but there is that facility to be able to do that.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Matthew Evans.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm just going on to another point about these subject access requests.
Yeah.
I noticed there's been a big increase in the numbers and the complexity of them.
Yeah.
in the report, it says that members are advised that one complex request can consist of 7,000 plus pages of records to redact, and a police annex request where there are multiple victims in addition to the alleged perpetrator can be excess of 3,000 documents.
Yeah.
And I also note you talk about pressures of compliance with this, and should the person who's been employed to deal with this additional work, potentially the local authority could see a rise in the number of complaints received for breaching timescales and fines which may be incurred by the Information Commissioner's officer. Can you explain to us, first of all, why we've seen such a big increase in them? Secondly, it seems like an obscene amount of paperwork even for social service cases, and that in itself can cause additional problems, missing things, potential liability. And I suppose, is there anything we can do as a scrutiny forum to make any recommendations to do with this?
Yeah, maybe please come in on that.
Yeah, and I think it's about being clear about, that's a safeguarding responsibility on the council in terms of being able to do subject access requests for individuals or for the police, mainly, usually through the court. The pressures on the council to turn these around in a timely manner has increased. I think in some of the documents that they have quoted, that's to do with historical allegations. So it is about going back through Gwent archives and various things to try and get that information together. Some of that may end up in very, very serious criminal convictions. Sometimes it might not do, but actually it's a duty on the council that we have to be able to provide that information, and it is a big task.
Okay, did anybody else want to come in on that? Sally, I can see you've knocked your camera on again.
Yeah, please, thank you. I suppose it's just to reiterate that the weight of the documentation is because of the historical nature, as Mary says. So these can be going back 30 years for some individuals, and obviously then they will have records that are over many years. And I absolutely agree with you, is that in the past there were very weighty tomes. Thankfully, more recent inquiries would be dealt with electronically, but obviously we're not able to do that with historical inquiries. I would say in relation to police requests for disclosure, I am very aware that from a South East Wales perspective, the local Family Justice Board is now liaising with the police, with Gwent Police and South Wales Police in relation to these requests, to try to look at how we get better timing in place with them, and also some recognition of the amount of work that's involved. And I'm also aware that there's some work being done by His Honour Judge Richard Williams, which is looking at how we work more effectively with the Crown Court, again across South Wales Police and Gwent Police, in terms of disclosure, recognising the challenge that there is for all local authorities in this area. It's not a Newport issue. It's a more general issue. And I think in terms of the rise, obviously some of it will be related potentially to some of the various inquiries that continue to take place.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks both.
Thank you. I don't have any indication of any further questions, but I'll give it a second just in case anybody pops on, because I know we've got a problem with our system. Okay, I think we're okay. So thank you for your time, everybody. It's really interesting. Like I said, it's it's a really comprehensive and difficult subject. It's nice to see so much, as Councillor Forsey said, a lot of green where we've really made gains in this area. But so thank you all for your time. If you'd like to drop off the call, and then we can continue with agenda item 6.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, so the next item of the agenda basically is just to conclude on the both reports, and any comments that you might have to pass forward to Cabinet in recommendation on these reports. So if we go back to the Strategic Equalities Plan, any comments or any indications on the report? How you any recommendations for actions on the report? So I think it might make sense, rather than putting your hand up if you've got some issues with the hands up functionality, if I go round the table one by one, and then you can give me your comments if you have any. So if I start with Councillor Al-Umami, as you're on my screen, any comments on the strategic equalities report to bring forward?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'd really want to see some work done. You know, we recommend, obviously, about sort of this liaison work with other authorities and regarding the travellers. That I feel really the authority here has actually got a permanent site. I'm not sure how far that is from being open. I think the council does suffer the consequences of a few sort of unauthorised encampments, and then the aftermath of those. I know that there was a lot of concern expressed at the council meeting about some of these unauthorised encampments. So I'd like to see that, you know, we can try and avoid that, because even if we can get agreement that the travellers themselves just clean the site when they go, I think that would be a plus. But anyway, that would be my recommendation on that one. And I think the other one that I would is the point I mentioned, and that has come to me during the COVID, about the rough sleepers and homelessness, that we can actually, they will be more inclined maybe to be housed by Edengate and Welwich, but some of them have been put out by the sort of, if you like, the religious side to it. I think simple things to do, but it's part of the equality there. Thank you, Chair. Can't hear you.
I'm doing that now. Councillor Hurahan, you're also on my screen. Did you want to make any comment on the strategic equalities report?
It's just a general comment on all the reports, and to pick up on what Matthew has said earlier, there's so much detail in it, it's very difficult, other than you spend an inordinate amount of time to get through it. And most reports from the commercial sector, private industry, start off with an executive report. Our reports start off with detail and then get further and further into detail without coming to any highlights. So I think it's something we need to take advice from Gareth about, whether executive reports are able to be produced and to allow us to comply with the Welsh Office guidance or Welsh Assembly guidance that we get when most of our stuff goes before them. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fawsey, any comment on this strategic equalities report?
Please. I would like to comment on the comments Councillor Al-Umami made just now about the religious aspects of Edengate. I have volunteered with them, and I think this is a message put out by people trying to make mischief rather than what is actually happening when you volunteer or when you're involved with this organisation. It's not something I've found to be the case that that they promoted their religion. It's open to everybody. Efforts have been made to cater to everybody's dietary requirements without any fuss. And I think that the churches have done a lot of good work in supporting people. I know it can't happen at the moment, and perhaps going forward it's not something that will happen for quite some time, but I think it's worth acknowledging the very good work that the churches have done there. Two comments I would like to make, or recommendation I would like to make, is about slightly stealing Phil's point, that we would like to promote some sort of direct interaction between the Youth Council and the full council. And just one small point on the data that is collected. I wonder whether humanist could be an option on the religious belief question, because we have, you know, we have everything else. We have agnostic, atheist, Buddhist, Christian, etc. Could humanist be included as an option?
Thank you, Councillor Forty. Councillor Matthew Evans, any comment on the content of the report?
Yeah, I'm hoping, first of all, when we go through these reports next time, can we do the first one and then make recommendations then the second one? Because
this is something that we're playing around with, so we were trying to work out which is the better format. So as you know, take your comment into account.
Been through it all, and it's easier to, because you know it's an hour later from the last one. I'm hoping my comments will be taken on board, and Reece has promised information regarding comparisons with other local authorities across the UK and how we can potentially look at targets and best practice about reducing child poverty. So I'm just hoping that those will be included in the recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Graham Berry, any comment on the first report?
First off, no, I think my problem is way beyond that. Can you see me?
No.
Yeah, right, but you can hear me.
I can hear you.
Okay. Listen, I think this is ridiculous. I'm having real problems. I think a few others have had problems as well. It's been hard to engage and join in with everybody. So I'm not too sure if it's my system or what, but basically they added in for 2 days last week and I assumed I had a good one back. Unfortunately, it's not working for me. So I have to give apologies here for a misjointed meeting on my behalf.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that, Councillor Berry. Councillor Ferris, any comment?
Okay, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean on the first report, a lot of the points raised were, well, yeah, this will be coming into action in 2020 or whenever, but of course COVID has superseded all that. So I think really we're dealing with what could be called a guesstimate, really, of where we actually are. And I think we should bear that in mind, because we don't really know due to these terrible circumstances which are beyond anybody's control.
Okay, thank you.
That's it.
I think I've covered everybody. I believe Councillor Evans has unfortunately lost his connection. So I think what I can, to conclude on that one, I think we're happy with the content of the actual report, but there are a number of points to move forward into the next report and how and what we would like to see and some information that we would like to bring back. I think, correct me if I'm wrong if anybody wants to jump in on that one, but secondly then, so we've got obviously the annual corporate safeguarding report that we've just covered. Again, any sort of issue?
Sorry, can I just, before you leave that item,
yep.
Because Councillor Forsey made a point, I just want to clarify that Yvonne, I think, you know, the thing has been relayed to me. I honestly don't believe there was any mischief in it, but you know, we as representatives have to listen to any representation we make, and I think I can accept really that in some cases people would not wish to start with a prayer. That's all it is. So you spoke earlier about people and names and so on. The whole thing about equality is to try and make people comfortable, you know, and not to make them feel they're pressurized in any sense because of whatever, you know, whether it's their race, their religion, their faith, or, you know, whether they follow religion or not. And that's the point I was making. Like I said before, I'm aware of the excellent work they do, but perhaps instead of starting with a prayer, perhaps, you know, just a welcome or something like that. And I think, you know, the whole idea is to try and get people to feel comfortable. And I think that's an important thing to do. Thank you.
Okay, can I come back in and say that I've volunteered with Edengate for several years and I've never started with a prayer. I've never been at a session where we've started with a prayer.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Nawami, as you're on there anyway, and we'll go around in the same order, any comment on the to bring forward for this corporate safeguarding report?
Yeah, I mean, just to be honest with you, I found that a very difficult report for us, and perhaps Councillor Evans may be correct here. It's a big area, and it requires a lot of expertise. We can only give it sort of a cursory treatment, really, because there's so much to do that. And I think we would be meeting for a very long time if we were to take every topic in there, because every topic in there raises a number of questions. I raised one question, which I think really it's important that the Social Services Department should have that expertise, because it's taking a decision to deprive some people of their liberty. I think that's important that they do that right, and then we're not open to legal challenge. And the other thing that we also have the legal knowledge that we are doing the right thing. And I think it's important, you know, if we're going to make a recommendation, I think we ought to have that or recommend that, because it's important that we approach the issue professionally and sensitively, because it does concern the right of people and their liberty. And I think that's a very important part of their lives. Okay. Thank you. Councillor Hooverhain.
Nothing really over and above what I said at the last opportunity, but I take up Mick Dad's point that deprivation of liberty is such an important thing. We need to make sure that our processes are completely watertight. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Fawsey.
Nothing further, thank you.
Okay, Councillor Matthew Evans.
I'm going to finish the meeting on a happy note, agreeing with Meek Dad. So don't put it in the minutes. Don't put it in the minutes.
You slip in, Matthew.
I know. No, I think it's just that the DBS checks are obviously a concern. So we need to look into that. Again, the subject access requests to ensure that we're not breaching timescales and risking fines from it. But yeah, I think everything else has been covered, hopefully.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Graham Berry.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I agree with Matthew there. The DBS checks, there's so much emphasis and importance put on those from all kind of areas and directions, that having gone quite a few through a few now, because I sit on the fostering and adoption panels and so on, I've always said, to me, they seem weak. Okay, that's to me. Now, I can't be specific because I've been caught on the hop here, but I would be quite prepared to come back or even refer to you the areas of the and the issues that I had with the current DBS. I'll say slackness, not a serious problem, but I think it could be tightened up. And as I say, having gone through a few of these now of recent, I think I'm quite well placed to offer a comment.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Councillor Ferris.
No, nothing to add really. It seems very comprehensive. Of course, it all depends on the accuracy of the information that we're being given, really, doesn't it? We never really know, and there's always the terrible events that happen which come completely out of the blue, and then we wonder how effective all the checks and balances that we are told are in place actually really are. But no, a comprehensive report, and nothing I've got any issues with, to be honest. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for that. I think the issue that the difficulty for us all today has been the delay in the reports, because of obviously, you know, circumstances out of our control. So it's quite difficult looking back on two reports that are potentially, you know, 7 months, and we've already started into a new programme of these reports anyway. So I think so thank you guys. So finally then we've got our forward work programme, and our next meeting we've got for the 22nd of January will be the budget consultation. So there's at the moment there isn't anything else. Where, as I alluded to earlier on in the meeting, there is a potential that we will be looking at new ways of working a report, but we're waiting for that to come to us. So the next meeting, which is the 22nd of January, will be a one-item agenda at the moment, which will be the budget consultation. And that's it, guys. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.